Hello, my name is Dan Heaton and I am the co-host of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast. The following interview was taken from episode 30 of the podcast. If you enjoy this interview and would like to hear more, please consider subscribing to the podcast via the usual podcast apps and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Thank you.
So Alasdair, thanks again for coming on. So first I want to ask you is what first got you involved in politics?
Well, thanks very much, Mike and Dan, and thanks very much for having me on today's podcast. It's been really interesting so far. I think I was always interested in politics. It was something that was always discussed when I was growing up. But I think the first campaign that really caught my attention was the No to ID campaign back in 2004, when the Labour government were planning to issue us all ID cards. And while I was very much opposed to it back then, I think probably my views might have changed since. But that was probably the first real campaign that I thought, I wanted to support, writing to MPs, petitions, promoting online and all that kind of thing. In terms of party politics, that was much more recent, really, actually. It was probably the 2015 general election that really motivated me to get involved in party politics. Having grown up and lived in Scotland for some of my life, including under an SNP administration there, I'd seen the damage that they'd done to Scotland, whether it was the health service, with education, or even just the government's finances. And I was quite frankly terrified of the idea of the SNP propping up a Labour administration in Westminster. So that's really what motivated me to get out there, start leafleting, start delivering, start having conversations on doorsteps, and trying to convince people that what they really needed to do was re-elect Conservative MPs and a Conservative government.
And to that end, of course, you ended up standing in the 2018 local elections in West Thornton. Now, I think it's fair to say West Thornton isn't a hotbed of conservatism. How was that experience for you?
Well, I hadn't actually planned to stand in the 2018 local elections. I was a very late addition as a candidate there. I replaced someone who had to drop out as they weren't able to stand anymore. And I think probably the most memorable or interesting thing about standing there that I can remember is really when one of the local papers, published and talked about the results and said that I'd received 6,000 votes rather than 600, which would have meant I'd have topped the ward. And that would have been great, but sadly, I think it's very unlikely to happen anytime soon in West Thornton. Much more interesting for me was the rest of the campaign. It was being fought on new boundaries in Croydon, so everything was new and a bit different, and there were a lot of seats in play that we thought could go either way. And I think probably one of the things that I always reflect back on during elections is really just how disappointing it is when you're speaking to people. They say they're unhappy about how the council might be doing things, but then also say they aren't going to vote. And that for me is probably the real sad and depressing part of being involved in local politics, when people just don't want to use the vote that people have fought so hard for us all to have many years ago.
Yeah, I would echo that. I would say as well, had you got 6,000 votes in West Thornton ward, I think it is reasonable that some sort of inquiry would be undertaken, since I'm fairly sure there aren't 6,000 people in the ward. But yes, it's a good point. Okay, so of course, around that time, you're also the chairman of the Croydon Conservative Federation. You've since moved on from that role. How did you get that role? How did you find it? And tell us a little bit about it.
So most local parties have a sort of a structure where you've got elected representatives from across the membership, and then individuals that take different roles, and then in the Conservatives' case for Croydon, a chairman and two deputies working across the whole borough. So I'd been on the local executive for a number of years, firstly elected there by my local branch, and then I did a couple of different roles as an officer of the Federation. And I think during that time, I'd really sort of demonstrated to people the positive contributions I could make. Hopefully I would have been a competent and successful chair, and steer through some of the projects and some of the change that people wanted to see, and hopefully bring it to a good conclusion. And I was also very keen to see some change. And I think, for me, I'm really keen that members of political parties are engaged. I think far too often the wider membership isn't engaged, either locally or nationally. And so that was something I was very keen to do. And I think people were initially very keen of the theory of that idea, but perhaps less so keen when they saw in practice what that might actually mean in terms of what we should have been doing differently that we perhaps hadn't been doing before.
Yes, indeed. And one of the things, and I guess this might relate to members' feelings, whilst you were chair, you signed a protest against the misuse of party funds on a propaganda campaign backing the withdrawal agreement. I believe that was published in Conservative Home, among others. How did that go down with some of the people within the party, and both perhaps for and against?
Well, it was certainly a very interesting time to be the Croydon Conservative Federation party chairman in the middle of the Brexit negotiations with Theresa May as Prime Minister, and all the various different proposals that were coming out from Number 10, the Chequers deal and everything else. And yes, I certainly put my head above the parapet and made my views and indeed the views of our members well known. In terms of that specific letter, I'd surveyed local members. We asked their views, which I thought was a fairly uncontroversial thing to do, but it hadn't really been done before. And members responded overwhelmingly. There were hundreds of responses within 24 hours. It was really quite amazing. And so I knew from that local members were not just incredibly positive for Brexit and wanting to leave, but also a proper Brexit. So I think the idea of spending money both on having a leaflet printed with the party funds nationally, and then using and asking our local volunteers and deliverers to deliver it was really something that I didn't think chimed with what our local members were thinking. But I think in terms of there was certainly controversy about that letter and me signing it, but it often wasn't on the leave or remain lines. It was much more about whether, some people saw it very much as rocking the boat. People were also conscious that, our previous MP and a number of other party members locally worked in Number 10. And so perhaps they would have preferred that I raised my concerns more privately and more directly with CCHQ and others. But I very much disagreed with that view. I think it's very important that local party members are asked their opinion, that they are listened to, and they are represented. Whether that is both privately, as I did do in a number of different forums and ways, but also publicly when clearly you aren't being listened to. And I think that was the real theme during my time as the local party chairman. Members in the party did not feel they were being listened to, either by the top of the Conservative Party, but most importantly, not by those that were in Number 10, and particularly Theresa May. So I stand absolutely by signing those letters, making those views known, and I think I got far more support for having done that than I ever did get complaints from people being a bit unhappy that I'd spoken out.
No, that's fantastic, and it proved true. I mean, you think a year ago now, we would have just gone through the European elections, and the Conservatives had a huge defeat there. Brexit Party doing particularly well. I think Conservative parties were way dropping down the polls at this time, and it's about a year ago Theresa May resigned. And you look at the end of last year, where an 80-seat majority was delivered for a party that had been in power for 10 years already, a fantastic result, and it kind of reflects the views of members that you amplified there. So it definitely paid off what you did. Coming back to Croydon, or talking about politics more generally, what are your thoughts, and we've touched on some of it, what are your thoughts more generally on politics in the borough?
I mean, I think reflecting back on some of the comments I've made earlier, in many ways, one of Croydon's problems is the fact it is effectively a two-party competition. It is incredibly partisan and entirely divided, with the Conservatives in the south primarily and Labour in the north, and everyone fights over Croydon Central, much as they do in the Westminster MP elections, they do for the council elections as well. Um, and there's just so many things about Croydon politics that are just absolutely mad, I think. You've got the crazy position where when they were in power, the Conservatives, the Conservative Croydon administration, built more houses than Labour, this administration, are under Labour. And I think people just don't understand that actually you can have a Conservative government in Westminster and then a Labour council. And I think there's a real interesting thing there about actually educating people more about how the political system in the UK works so they can understand the different levels of government and who is representing them at those different levels. And it does sort of mean for me that with people not always understanding who's in charge and thinking it's maybe the other party, the other colour, that, Tony Newman and Labour, they do feel a bit like Teflon sometimes because they're not properly held to account by the electorate. And I think if there was much more awareness within, the population and residents of Croydon about what was going on in the council, that would hopefully lead to some really positive change. And I'm particularly conscious that, we don't have a local media and local press really to talk of in Croydon anymore. So the opportunities for people to hear things and understand what's going on are really quite limited. So for me, it's really just quite sad. And I think overall, the people of Croydon deserve better than what we're currently seeing.
Yes, absolutely. That lack of local media and the loss of the things like the Croydon Citizen are a real, real bitter blow for the town because there isn't anyone that any route to market for much of what's going on. You're absolutely right there. But you've been involved in politics for a number of years now, and I've seen you out leafleting myself, and you've been on the campaign trail many times. What surprised you most about getting actively involved in politics? And have you got any interesting or fun stories from the campaign trail?
I mean, I think the main reflection I'd take away and I want to share is that it's actually quite fun. Getting engaged in a political party can be really enjoyable. And then there's different ways to get involved from there. You can go to interesting fundraisers where you've got interesting people speaking, and hopefully get to ask them some questions and understand their views in a very different setting to what you might see either in the written press or the media on TV. But also, I think some people have this idea that to be involved in politics, everyone involved must be really quite odd and a bit strange, and that's really not true at all. I mean, I think I probably don't have anything particularly interesting or fun from the campaign trail. You've got the usual sort of trying to gingerly avoid the barking dog that wants to bite off your fingers when you're delivering leaflets and all those kind of issues. But I think my wider reflection would be on really the state of the political parties and having met people and spoken to people both around the country from both the Conservatives and the Labour side is actually that thinking about our politicians and running the country and everything around that actually political parties are often quite disorganized. Thinking about the Conservatives in particular, you've got some pockets of great practice and really good practice, but often the parties locally and indeed nationally quite often are run in very old-fashioned, ineffective and inefficient ways. And particularly from the Conservative side, when you think about all the professionals involved, they would never in their day job work in their job like that or run their teams, organizations, and or their businesses like that. And yet, when it comes to the political party, it's often done to a very different standard and level. And I think that's something I'd really love to see improve. And I also talked a lot earlier about members being involved. And I think Labour perhaps have the opposite problem there. Members vote on everything in Labour. And typically those members, as we've seen in recent elections, definitely aren't representative of the country as a whole. So you've got these real big party political machines that just aren't working very well. And that, I think, is a really depressing situation for me, that when you think about the fact that these are the political parties with the people in them who want to run the country, and that their own parties could be run much better. I would really hope that the reason they aren't is that people are focusing on running the country and trying to get elected. But it would be nice perhaps for a bit more time to be spent getting those things firing on all cylinders. And I think, finding ways to engage local residents more. It should be much more of a two-way communication. It shouldn't just be dropping off the leaflets through people's doors and annoying them if you're doing it every week, as you are in the middle of a general election campaign or a local council campaign. And I think some of the things we've done that probably are the most interesting is when you run the public meetings, you get the people in. And you just hear some terrible stories of where either the local council or national government have let people down. And you can do some real positive, good things for them. People can go away and get those problems solved. But that does require much more of a two-way communication. And I really think that is something that both political parties in Croydon, but also all political parties in the UK should be focusing a lot more on.
Yes, it's interesting just how small often the political party effort is, how relatively little money numbers of people provide almost all of that infrastructure. Yeah, it will shock a lot of people, I think. Well, thanks ever so much for that. Just before we go on this, any other thoughts you'd like to leave us with about politics or really anything in general?
I mean, I think for me, in terms of politics, it would be to get involved. As you said, people would be amazed at how few people are actually behind the party machines, particularly locally, that produce all the literature and deliver it. It doesn't matter what your age is, what your background is, what type of person you are. Get involved. You will find people that hopefully you like and can get along with and have really interesting conversations with. I would particularly encourage people with different views to what we see on the media. We're forever having people talking about climate change and getting to net zero and lots of socialists and everything. And we need some more voices for the ordinary British person. We know from recent elections that the climate change warriors and the lefty socialists are not representative of the country as a whole. Even it's Remainers versus Leavers. So I would really encourage more normal, rational individuals to get involved, have a voice, share their voice. Personally, I've met some really great people, both locally in the Croydon Conservatives and nationally in the wider party. And for me, when I first got involved in 2015 locally, I didn't quite expect to be fighting two further general elections within 4 years. But, that's, I think, just also an illustration of how unexpected it can be. But it can be a lot of work, but it is good fun. So I think no matter what your age, background, experience, or any political views, I would really just encourage people to get involved and make their voice known.
Oh, thanks for that, Alasdair. The fascinating insight into what it's like to get involved in a political party and to politics in Croydon.